Welcome back for another episode of the Better Decisions podcast. My name is David Siddons and I'm going to be your host. And I'm sitting here with Debby Lichtner, who is actually a friend and someone who works at my daughter's school. And I've asked her to come in today because we're going to talk about how to navigate the private school system in Miami. And this is what you won't learn online. So, Debby, thank you so much for coming in today and doing this. Please introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, what school you work with, and then we'll get into some questions.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. Thank you, David. I appreciate being invited on your podcast. Debby Lichtner, I'm at St. Thomas Episcopal Parish School. I'm the Director of Admission and Enrollment Management. Have been there coming into my 8th year, but my children did attend St. Thomas. So my background is marketing and communications, and I feel like it's a perfect fit for me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Tell us a little bit about St. Thomas as a school. Let's start off with the school itself, because I think that gives us a good kind of understanding of like your area of focus. And then we'll expand into the wider schools.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think it's the best school around. Have to say that.
Me too.
But it's been around for nearly 70 years, and it is an outreach of the church, so St. Thomas Episcopal Parish Church. But I will say that you do not have to be Episcopal to attend. In fact, diversity is the name of the game at St. Thomas, where we have families of all faiths, of all cultures. It doesn't matter. Everybody is welcome. We have about 425 students on campus, and we serve children from the ages of 3 through 5th grade. So I'm very happy that we have had a completely filled school for many years now, and I'm happy to be there.
Well, it's a fabulous school, and as I said, I have 2 daughters, and they both go to St. Thomas, and they're super happy. And this was born of this decision to do a conversation about navigating the private school system in Miami, because I'm going through it. You see it every single day. So let's dive in. We've seen, and obviously I'm going to step back a little bit to 2020, we've seen a lot of families move into Miami from all over the country in the last couple of years. And I know that as time has gone on, Miami's filled up. So our first question I have for you is what are the challenges that you hear about when people are coming to you that you're interviewing at St. Thomas or meeting? What are the challenges that these families are facing as they're moving into the city?
Well, right now, Miami is in overload, and so they're really looking for space more than anything else. The majority of the families that come to St. Thomas have been referred to us through their friends, through their other schools, their former schools where they came from, as well as their corporations. So they're primarily looking for space first, and then they're looking for their home. But I would say that the biggest challenge right now is just trying to get into these schools, as we're completely filled.
And that wasn't the case a couple of years ago. There seemed to be a lot more spaces, but as one parent said to me, it's harder to get a space in a school than it is to find a house. And finding a house has not been easy.
No, it was the case before COVID, where we were seeing a little bit more space available as families started trending to more of an urban lifestyle. And then everything changed during COVID. So we started filling up to the point where we have had a robust waiting list in almost every grade level at St. Thomas. And I have to say that my counterparts at the other private schools are in the same scenario. So these families are wanting to move into the suburban areas again. They want that kind of lifestyle for their families. And as a result, we are more than filled, but we like to keep a small class size. So that's what keeps us from accepting everybody. There's just no way.
Yeah, it's the realities of what we're facing with right now. And when we started to look at this, I was looking for how are people going to approach the process of finding a good school, a good private school in Miami. So I did what most people I would imagine will do, and they went onto Google and they put in a search, best private schools in Miami. And there's actually over 600 searches every single month for that exact term. So clearly people are looking. And if you've got 600, that's a pretty good number, plus a lot of other searches coming through. When you're looking to the best school, and again, this is really subjective, and I know when you go online, and we were talking about this earlier, you find websites like Best Schools and niche.com, which kind of give you some factual information, but you were saying it doesn't get us updated, and it can be, sometimes it's just, it's factual, but it doesn't delve much further than that. How do we identify these best private schools? I mean, what would you say for those people who are going to read this and say, okay, I'm trying to identify? What's the process?
I would say your first process is obviously to go on to websites, go into these types of searches, but you need to go and visit the schools. That's the only way really that you're going to have a firsthand experience in terms of seeing these schools. I would say that 95% of these schools all have the same level of academics. We have excellent schools to choose from. It's that last 5% that's really going to make the difference. And that's something that is innate. It's in your heart. The families will feel it. Can you see your child walking down these hallways and being immersed into this school community? What does the school community offer in addition to academics? Because that's not what it's all about anymore, David. It's more along the lines of that social emotional intelligence and that education as well. The differentiation that different schools could offer for that student. What type of a community, especially for families that are moving here from out of town, they don't have anybody here that they know for the most part. They don't have family members, extended family members. So they're looking to build a community. So what schools can offer that sense of community for those new families? Because that's what they're going to want.
Yeah, I mean, when you come into an area, and I feel this because I am a relocation expert, as I've been a realtor in Miami for 17 years. And what I experienced when people would move in was it's about finding the right school, the distance to the school, the lifestyle around it, and then obviously figuring out as they go through there, the fit for them as a family, for a good environment, a healthy environment, which we can touch on. And then obviously for their child's needs. You mentioned something to me off camera, which was brilliant. And I've never heard it before, but we talked about how the world is changing. And you mentioned that there is a focus on neurodiversity. Explain neurodiversity as you see it, because I think it's an interesting subject to move away from just the academics.
Children are learning differently. And maybe we all had this as well when we were growing up, but 1 out of 5 children learn differently, and we call it neurodiversity. So how does that school meet the needs of all of these children? They can no longer teach the way that we were taught when we were growing up, where there was a teacher in the front of the classroom teaching to everybody. You either got it or you didn't get it. You have those children that sit on the high end in a classroom and they exceed grade level expectations. Those that meet grade level expectations, but those that might need a little bit of a push or a little bit of support in either language arts or math. How does the school work with the children? How does the teacher work with those children? These are important questions to ask as you go through and search for the right fit for your family. Because again, every child learns differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And as they progress through into the next school and then into college, the skill set that they need is not the same skill set that they necessarily needed 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because the job pool is changing enormously and everything that goes with it is changing.
Well, this is what I talk to my families about all the time, is that education has changed. So even though we say that academics are very strong in all of these private schools, that we have to change the way that we teach also. We have to teach the children how to collaborate, to work with one another, to problem solve, to think critically, because many of the jobs that will be out there by the time they finish college and on to their graduate degrees aren't jobs that are available today. So as we can see today, that there are jobs that are here today that weren't there when we were in school. So
Sure.
How do we give them the tools that they're going to need as they move forward that can tap onto the academic portion? So it's not only the critical thinking and the problem solving, but it's also ethics, values. How are you teaching that child to navigate their lives and think differently from the rest?
But it's brilliant. It's you're actually on point.
Well, I mean, I want to be, but it's more resiliency. How do you teach the child not to be they're being helicoptered, right? So
That's an interesting thing, and we can talk about that. Helicopter parenting is a term that we've heard a lot. Like parents who are just living vicariously through their children because they're like, I want to get my kid into Yale or Harvard or into an Ivy League school, or where I went to school in England, it was like Oxford and Cambridge. And the way that the testing now is, and again, I know people look for best private schools, best high schools, and St. Thomas prepares the kids for middle and high school, and then from there into college. But what you are saying, this approach of helicoptering and superimposing your will on the kids is really misguided, because even the Ivy League testing is different. It's changed.
It sure has. It sure has. In fact, we understand that none of the Ivy Leagues now require standardized testing, because that's not how you determine a person's success in life.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Life is changing. The canvas is changing. They're realizing that what they have done, what the child can bring to the table. Have they led different clubs? Can they write? What kind of extracurricular activities can they bring? They want a more diverse group of children coming in and young adults coming into their schools.
Yeah.
So what is that? What does that look like? How do they interview? How do they communicate? Can they communicate? Because that's another problem right now, is that, technology is taking away our means to communicate with one another. And so we need to get back to that so that they can understand how it is that they can navigate and that they can think critically and problem solve in teams.
And away from the iPad.
And away from all technology, as far as I'm concerned.
It was fascinating when there was a term, I guess, they brought out when they would call these COVID kids, children who were raised or born during the COVID period. And you go to a park and a mum would go, oh, she's a COVID kid. That's why she doesn't communicate so well, because they'd spent their time away from other human beings. And we talked about this conversation about the healthiest environment to raise your family. And I think this is what this is about. This whole thing is about, how do I raise my family in the healthiest way? And I think of that with my girls too. Their education is more than just them, as you said, being able to read and write and do math tests. There's a lot more to it. And you've really brought that out in this conversation. When you're preparing the high schools, and I just want to touch on, so those people who don't know, who might be watching this out of state and they're searching, and I think that's very real. People could watch this podcast coming in from another city. What are the high schools in Miami that you're affiliated, associated with, aware of, that people might go into after they've been to St. Thomas, so they could maybe give some thought to that?
Sure. Well, we have a very robust exmissions program. We feed into the best middle and high schools here in this area, primarily Ransom Everglades, Palmer Trinity, Gulliver Prep, Belen Jesuit for the boys, and Carrollton School of the Sacred Heart for the girls, starting in middle and high school. And so with our robust process, we invite the directors of admission to come to our campus, and our rising fifth grade parents have the opportunity to ask questions about these schools right in their own home, their own school home here at St. Thomas. So we basically have 99% of our children go back into the independent school system. Very few, maybe one, maybe two a year, will go into the public school system, but primarily into a magnet or a charter school.
Let's discuss a little bit in terms of, and again, I want to get back into the conversation about, the families moving in and psychology and whatnot, because that's an important aspect of this conversation. But I want to go into an area of a conversation of geography, of getting to school in the morning. And it sounds as a very simplistic part of conversation, but it's a very real one. And sometimes people get misplaced on where they need to be. With a school like St. Thomas, how close should you live to the school? I mean, what are you finding there with the families who are coming to school? Where are they living?
Our statistics tell us that the families are coming in from within an 8-mile radius of the school. We have had families that have started at St. Thomas, living on the beach or living north of downtown Miami. They fall in love with the school community and they make the decision to move south and closer to the school, because in an elementary school, you want to live closer to the school because there are so many on-campus activities for the parents, and they want to be involved with their little ones.
Yeah, I think that's very key, because it's not just the dropping the kids off to school in the morning. I know that commute, we did an article which said, okay, how can you be within 15 minutes of the school that you want to send your children to? But it's the after school. And I touch on that with families when they're moving in, because once school finishes, I know with my girls, there's dancing, and there's soccer, and there's all these other swimming. There's all these things that go on that revolve around and around the school. And not necessarily on the school campus, but they've got sports grounds around close by that you need to get to. And if you live on the beach, that's going to make your life very, very challenging. And it's going to make it challenging for your kids, because your kids are going to be stuck in the car as you go back and forth to these events. They can't drive.
No, and it's not healthy for the children, nor for the families, by the way.
So with that in mind, just give us some of the areas that are close to St. Thomas so people can be aware, and maybe name not just some of the neighborhoods, but some of the communities that are close by that are of high value. And you can find these actually, if you go into our website, you can get details of these neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And David, you can probably tell me more in terms of the different area codes or zip codes, I should say, in Coral Gables. But I would say primarily Coral Gables, both east and west of the highway. Mm-hmm. Coral Gables also encompasses all of the islands. So it would be Cocoa Plum and Gables Estates and Journey's End and those, as well as the whole Ponce Davis area. Pinecrest is a big pull for us as well. And the South Miami area right near us. We're on the cusp, actually. St. Thomas lands right on the corner of South Miami or unincorporated Dade, Coral Gables, and Pinecrest.
Yeah, it's slap bang in the middle of surrounded by a lot of other private schools. And I know that you are pretty much, ground zero when it comes to family location. Yes, you're right. Ponce Davis, Coral Gables, the 4-3, the 4-6 zip code, Coconut Grove, 33133, Pinecrest and the gated communities, 33156. And as you said, Old Cutler Bay, Gables Estates, Snapper Creek. Sure. Journey's End, Hammock Oaks, Hammock Lakes. You can find these all online and have a look at them. We detail all the houses for sale in those neighborhoods. Yes. But these are all within a 15-minute drive to the school, max 15-minute. Ponce Davis, where I live, takes me about 3 or 4 minutes in the morning, which I can tell you is worth its weight in gold, because time is the one asset that I can't get back. And if I'm spending 30, 40 minutes in the car every day, I know I can do things, but it's not the same. It's not the same as being, at my desk or having breakfast with the kids rather than, being stuck in the car. So geography is a big element to it. And I know that other schools, you can jump on a bus. And I know there are schools where, as we get into high schools, kids can jump on the bus and get to the school. And that's a little better for them because they're older. Mm-hmm. But I think any child at any age, it might not be ideal to be stuck in a form of transport, whatever it is, for an hour to get to school.
It doesn't make any sense on an elementary level. Certainly, David, I can understand on a middle and high school level, but not on an elementary level, where the parents' demand in terms of being on campus is much more prevalent.
I've noticed with St. Thomas, there is a presence of involvement with parents that happens a lot more at the elementary school level than you see in the middle and the high school level.
Yes, that's what I was just saying. And being able to be there when your young child is having a showcase and having some kind of a presentation and being able to just jump over and be a part of that and be invited on campus. Because not only that, but most schools don't offer the opportunity to have the parents on campus. St. Thomas embraces it.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing, because there's nothing better than seeing your children, their experiences as they're going through those early years in life. There are pivotal moments which bring a tear to your eye, bring a tear to my eye, and it's priceless. It's the best moments of my life to see these aha moments with my kids, realizing something, learning something, being part of something. It's life in front of us. So thank you for that. I wanted to go into some of the realities that we're seeing right now with the relocations, because I know it was almost like the everyday conversation that we would have. The word relocation and school are almost, they're in a synonymous sentence and in a search that we will see. In 2021, we obviously saw a huge number of people moving down from New York, California, relocations coming into Miami. Have you seen any slowdown or change in behavior for the migration of families coming in from these other states?
The statistics tell us that it has slowed down, but that's not necessarily the truth, because the problem is, or I should say the challenge is, that there were families that moved in a couple of years ago. They moved to South Florida. They found whatever housing they could find at the time. They found space at different schools, whatever they could find at that time also, because we were already receiving this influx of applications. Now they have local addresses. So now they're reapplying. They're applying to St. Thomas, for example, but yet they have a local address. When I talk to them and I have our parent meetings, I'm finding out that maybe a year or two ago, they moved down from New York or they moved from California and they've settled temporarily at a particular house. And so we're seeing a local address for them, but they are really the relocated families.
Interesting. So are you seeing some families who may have settled on the beach or Key Biscayne or other areas, and now they've established a base, but now they're looking around to change school to the school that they really want rather than the school they could just get into? That's what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And in fact, it's very interesting for me because either they've settled with their home and they find that they don't really like being on Key Biscayne or they don't really like being on the beach, that this is what they thought they wanted. And then they put their child in any school that they could find close by. Now they've had the opportunity to investigate, to research, to go to the open houses, and they're seeing the differences in the schools where they really feel the right fit for their child. So now they want to move back over to our area. They want to move from the beach or from these isolated areas. They want to go to the better schools, and our area certainly has the better schools. I have to say that hands down.
Oh, yeah.
So we're seeing that they're changing their home. They're changing their school. They're trying to get into these schools now that they weren't able to get into before. So we're going to see what's going to happen this year.
It's going to be interesting. We actually wrote an article and it was titled The Best 3 Family Neighborhoods in Miami. And it's Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, and Pinecrest. And obviously within Coral Gables, we give you kind of like the subdivisions of Ponce Davis and the gated communities. But those are the big 3. And it's easy to understand why, because of the quality of life. And I think that we touched on free-range children, kids being outdoors, being able to play. And before we started rolling the camera, it was interesting because we were both talking about how we were raised as kids. And I know education has changed in terms of what we're teaching them, but how they live and how they can experience life as a child and grow up as kids in a healthy environment was about being able to allow them to run around outside and have a yard and have space and ride their bike and hang out with their friends. Touch us a little bit on that, because I feel this. I mean, I live this every single day, but I want to understand what you're seeing and the values that you're getting conveyed by parents to you and what they appreciate.
Well, I think that too, that what we're seeing is those that have settled into high rises in Coconut Grove and Gables or wherever it might be, and COVID hit and they didn't have that opportunity to have their kids outside, that they're recognizing that they want the same kind of upbringing that they had when they were growing up. I mean, we can all remember going out and feeling very safe, going on our bicycles and playing with our neighbors and going into different people's yards and houses, whatever the case might be. Well, so there's this trend to go back to that kind of an experience for our children, being able to give that to our children as well. In these areas that you're talking about, Pinecrest and Coral Gables and Coconut Grove, we have neighborhoods like that, the gated communities where the kids can feel that they're safe. We can feel that they're safe going out on their bicycles and playing and really having a relationship with our neighbors. You know, it's not just all fenced in and gated in anymore, that we have an area, although there are gated communities, that's not what I'm talking about, but having the fences right in front of our house where it says, you know what, hands off, we're not a part of the neighborhood. These areas show that you can do that still. And we feel safe having our children play with our neighbors.
Yeah. And the streets are a little quieter. I mean, that's one of the things people would ask me, what is the best gated community in Miami? And my opinion is Gables Estates. Gables Estates, and then to that, Old Cutler Bay and Snapper Creek, and I've got to say Jenny's End would be in there. Yes. And the reason is because you can go to other communities around. You can go to Venetian Islands and those areas, which are very beautiful, don't get me wrong. But your kids can't ride their bikes around the streets. They don't have that free range ability to just walk down the street on their own and have access and walk to their friends' houses. These neighborhoods these communities do have that, which is absolutely key if you want to raise a family in a healthy environment. And I'm seeing that more and more, people coming in and saying, you know what, I'm going to move from this outside area, this condo, or this community that may be more towards the beach, and I'm going to move them into a single family neighborhood or a community in Coral Gables or Coconut Grove or even Pinecrest, where I can just have a healthy environment to raise my kids. When we get into migration of people coming into Miami, this is a very recent phenomenon. So I don't know if it's hit you yet, if you're experiencing it, but I was speaking to a neighbor, and they just Chile just had its elections. Brazil have its elections coming up. There's a lot of movement within the South American countries, which has traditionally always been a big part of our real estate fabric and landscape. Have you seen any applications start to come in from these kind of locations, these South American countries?
It's interesting. I happen to be from Chile, and I
didn't know that.
Yes,
I didn't know you're from Chile.
I am.
Okay, I learn something every day.
So I still have family there, and interestingly enough, we have more and more people from Chile that are coming in that are talking to me because, of course, the economy has downturned tremendously. It's a shame what's happening in Chile, in a lot of these countries, and so it isn't the influx that we saw a couple of years ago with Venezuela and from Brazil, but we're seeing it from all of these countries that are going through these crises, so to speak, Argentina as well. So I would still say, though, that it is on the lower end in comparison to those that are coming from other areas of the United States. We are seeing this bigger trend, though, as moving forward from South America, even as opposed to Europe, which we had a couple of years ago during Brexit. So it's very interesting to see these countries that are now moving in, these families that are moving in from these different countries.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation and dynamic. And I think it's one that we're going to see play out in the next few months as we start to spend more time engaging with this particular audience. As you know, my wife's from Brazil, so we're keeping a close eye on the Brazilian elections, and we're already seeing some changing behaviors because of that. One of the things I wanted to touch on is, I think we can all agree, if you can get into the right school and you choose the school that you want to get into, it's ideal, it's wonderful. But the reality is that it's not always so easy to get a place at these private schools. There isn't enough for everybody because Miami isn't that big. And if you're pulling people from all over not even just the country, but all over the world, spaces have become less available. And have you experienced it in terms of like each year, the number of spots available for kids to come in to St. Thomas? Has that adjusted? Well,
we're seeing a lower attrition rate, which means that fewer and fewer families are moving out of Miami. Very interesting for us. So we typically have about 60, 65 spaces every single year, primarily in our little 3-year-old program. We have 42 spots. But the idea with St. Thomas anyway is to keep our class sizes very small. We're not going to increase that just because we've had this influx of families moving into the area. We're going to maintain our sort of boutique style class sizes. So there are greater numbers of those that are on our waiting list. I would have to tell families that are coming here, you can't just apply to one independent school anymore. You have to really spread the wealth, and you have to apply to a few of them because there are no guarantees anymore.
And the attrition rate obviously has dropped. There was an article that came out a few days ago that said a lot of New Yorkers are heading back to New York. And I was like, I don't see that. Have you seen, anybody, families, and saying, you know what, we tried it, it didn't work for us?
No, we haven't. We're very fortunate that way. Not one at this point. And I have to say the national trend in terms of independent school attrition is about 10%. You lose 10% of your population in any given year. Ours is less than 2%. So I have to say, on the contrary, we have not seen that trend.
I agree. From a real estate perspective, I don't know where they got their statistics, but I'm not seeing that at all within the resale market. When obviously it comes to getting into the schools, and you mentioned one very good point, which is applied to more than one school. Look at other schools. Is there any advice that you'd also give in terms of timing? Because people often say to me, David, when should I be applying? And is there a perfect time? In the same way, is there a perfect time to list your home? Is there a perfect time to apply to these private schools?
The earlier, the better. For the most part, these private schools, us included, you can start applying as early as September 1st for the following school year. So we're already well underway. And in fact, interestingly enough, David, before I came here, I was looking at our numbers that we're already ahead of last year, which our numbers last year were historic for us in terms of the amount of inquiries and the amount of applications that we've received at this time of year. So we're already ahead of that. And again, we're looking at the following fall 23-24 school year. So Time is of the essence. Go and visit your schools. Many families that I've spoken to, they are working with their realtors, but they're also working with the schools, and they're making the decision based off of what school their child gets into. When you're looking at one school, but you're applying to several, make sure that they're all in the same area so that you're looking in these areas that David has talked to you about.
Yeah, so true. So true. You've got to kind of, and the good thing is they're actually not too far from each other. It's not like, Miami's a really big city. You're going to find that they're all within, 10, 15 minute drive of each other, which is
the best schools are in South
the best
Florida.
ones, yeah,
Yes.
100%,
Yes.
100%. So obviously, St. Thomas is a feeder school to the middle schools and high schools, and you've mentioned obviously the schools that we're involved in. When it comes into, obviously we've gone through timing, wanting to finish on a high note, the private schools, the future of the private school system in Miami, where do you see the future going? I mean, are we going to see more private schools being introduced into the city? Are we just going to stay the same number that we have? And I'm just trying to think of like how we're navigating the future.
What I've seen with the families that live in this area or that come into this area, and they know other people in the area, and that's typically what happens. They're educated, they've done their research, they know primarily where they want to live, what schools they want to go to. Many of them tend to go towards schools that have history in Miami. They're not necessarily looking for the up-and-comer, the new school in town. They want history, they want success, they want proven success in terms of where that child will matriculate. So I see that as a challenge in terms of any new schools coming into the area. Our families want that proven success rate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that we're going to, obviously, the reality is the city gets more popular, and as it's not going to diminish in its desire, and there isn't a reversal of behavior, that it's all about choosing the right school and looking at its pedigree and looking at people like yourself who are involved in this school, invested in this school, and the values of what you have, of how the kids are being educated. I want to thank you. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that we should touch on before we kind of move through, but I think we've kind of pretty much covered everything. We'll think of a way, the best way to conclude this entire conversation, which is about what you need to learn in the process of moving down here, whether you're moving within Miami or whether you're coming in from another state. The key lessons to take away about choosing the best private school in Miami.
I would have to say that it's relationship building. Don't just stick an application in because you need 2 or 3 applications in to the right schools for the opportunity to have your child there. Build a relationship with that director of admission. Speak to other families, or ask the admission director for the opportunity to speak to other families that are currently enrolled at the school so that you can understand a little bit more about the culture and see if that is the right fit for you. So what we're looking for in terms of even the parent meeting, and in fact, schools that even offer an opportunity to speak one-on-one with the director of admission is important because you want to see if you are like-minded. In the end, when your small child is invited to a play date, does the family hold the same values that you do? Well, you're not going to know that unless that school has done a good job of finding other families that are like-minded. So I would have to say that it's all about relationship building.
100%. And to take it one step further, not to try and plug myself overly, but when you come into an area and you're trying to understand it, the wider community is also very, very important. And it's my job as a realtor, as a real estate expert, and someone who lives in the neighborhood with a family and knows this lifestyle, to be able to take you into these little areas, these gated communities, these enclaves, these pockets, these cul-de-sacs that you're not going to find on your own. You're not going to know about them. But this is where, when you find the right environment, and that can be the right home, the right street, the right school, this community, this environment is going to massively determine how you perceive and how happy you're going to be. Because I know that if you end up in the wrong location, might be the right city, might be the wrong location, it's going to change how you feel about everything. So as with always, you need to be with an expert, whether
Absolutely.
You're with someone like yourself or with someone like myself, finding the right home. And we work together beautifully. That's the nice thing. The reason we're doing this is because we have a great line of communication because we're talking to the same people. So please, again, I always say, reach out to Debbie, reach out to me. I'll connect you with Debbie directly. I'm very invested in the process of educating my kids, and I empathize hugely. Debby, thank you so much for doing this. I think you've given our audience a huge amount of good information, helpful information. As always, see my information below. I'm going to put Debby's information below as well. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Debbie's information is also below, so you can reach out to her. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned next time for another Better Decisions podcast.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.